afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Laurent Antonsi. I am Public Affairs Manager for Hydrogen Technologies at CEA in France. CEA is an Energy Research Commission, and I'm also President of Hydrogen Europe Research, which is the European Research Association for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to participate to that first plenary session on hydrogen towards a net zero pathway. We are living a historical moment. Usually we say hydrogen is the energy of the future, but I would more say hydrogen is now. And today hydrogen is considered as a second leg of the energy transition. And we can really see that over the last 2 years, momentum is really shifting into actions. More than 30 countries over the world have now their own hydrogen strategy. But industry is also increasing hydrogen-related investment with quite a lot of some hundreds of large-scale demonstration projects. And if we want to create now a hydrogen economy, we see that international collaboration has really become central. But we also have to acknowledge that there will be no unique solution. This means that in order to achieve our climate targets and all the hydrogen which may be used to have these targets, we will need low carbon and renewable hydrogen as much as we can during this decade. And this means that low carbon hydrogen produced either by steam methane reforming with carbon capture sequestration or using nuclear electricity is not competing with renewable hydrogen, but both are complementing, or at least for the next decade, in order really to decrease the total amount of CO2 emissions. And what are the main barriers for the creation of this hydrogen economy? There are different key drivers, and these key drivers, I think we must also acknowledge that they are depending on unique national circumstances. So depending on the country we are considering, different drivers may not have the same weight. So of course there are some environmental benefits, fighting the climate change, but there are also some concerns regarding energy security, in particular in Europe these days. And also we have to ensure an energy system resiliency and stability, which might be more and more challenging while increasing the share of renewable electricity. And also an economic growth. And here also we're creating a new industry, and so innovation and technology are really very important. But there are key challenges to be solved, and we all want to get at a global scale. And first challenge, and as a research I would say innovation is key. This also has been mentioned by the executive director of the IPHE, Fatih Birol, some years ago during COP26 last year, that if we want to achieve our climate targets, we need to develop more than half of the technologies today which are not already existing. So from that point of view, innovation is really key. And this innovation must ensure that we will be able to get a low carbon hydrogen cost competitive. And this means innovation, but also scaling up of the production, and also having a skilled workforce in order to run all these new technologies from initial courses to long life trainings. Second challenge is policy and regulatory framework. And here what we really need is a stable and strong policy signal with regulatory certainty and market transparency. And as the third challenge, I would mention also we need quite a lot of infrastructure investment. This means in order to really rely on gigafactories of electrolyzers to produce this low carbon hydrogen. But once we have produced that hydrogen, we also need then to have all the means for transmit that produced hydrogen. And finally, we have to ensure that we will be able to use that clean hydrogen in all these, in particular, have hard to abate sectors in industry. And this means that we really need today as a challenge to create demand in key applications, but also to create trust and confidence in the benefits of hydrogen in order to achieve this climate fight against the climate change. And I propose to focus more on this policy and regulatory framework. So IPHE is a government-to-government partnership, including 21 countries, and India and the European Commission. And the idea is really how can we accelerate hydrogen and fuel cell deployments. There are different activities, regulation codes and standard and safety, and a heat map have been produced telling where are the main issues to be solved in order to produce the right regulations. And a specific task force on analyzing the greenhouse gas emissions when producing hydrogen. And if we want to create a hydrogen economy, we also need to ensure that we can facilitate international hydrogen trades. All these documents are freely available on the IPHE website. In order to answer a very easy question, is what is clean hydrogen? It might be easy, but in fact the answer is quite difficult. And but it is essential in order, if we want to create some certification or guarantee schemes, guarantees of origins, we need all to agree on what is clean hydrogen. And this has to be done in a really transparent way, so that really market transparency is really expected by the society. And here I think carbon content becomes really a pivotal parameter. You see the different questions we have to answer if we want to define what clean hydrogen is. I don't want to go through all the questions, but you can imagine that if we want to have an international common methodology of greenhouse gas emissions, we need to work on it from now. And that's why IPHE has created this specific task force 3 years ago. And in order to create confidence in the benefits of hydrogen, of course, what we are developing has to be inclusive, which means that we do not have to focus only on one primary energy, but we need to ensure that we are taking into account all the potential ways to produce hydrogen, but agreeing how to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions. Flexible, because from one country to another, there are some unique circumstances that we have to be able to take into account, and therefore to be flexible. Transparent, as mentioned, in order to create trust, we need to propose methodologies which can be reproduced and rely on really transparent and robust data and assumptions. Comparable, of course, if you want to compare different hydrogen production pathways, all what we are doing has to be comparable. We want to compare apples with apples. But also what we are considering for hydrogen has also to be comparable with other energy vectors, like for instance electricity. And finally, if we want to implement these methodologies, they have to be practical. And therefore, they have not to be too complicated or too expensive in order that industry will take these methodologies and apply them to develop our hydrogen market. And IPHE has released last year for COP26 the first document considering the first hydrogen production pathways, and IPHE should release in a couple of weeks the version 2 document, including additional hydrogen production pathways, but also emissions due to the conditioning of hydrogen into hydrogen carriers. And so I would just encourage you to download and to read this document. And this approach will then be transferred to ISO to become a new international standard. Another point in order to create trust is also to consider different points, and I would just like to stress different points. The first one is regarding water. Some people are stressing that water stress will be quite high when producing hydrogen. But if we look at ARENA report from earlier this year, you see that if we want to produce the 500 million tons of hydrogen as a foreseen in IEA report by 2050, we may need around 25 billion cubic meters of water. But if we compare with what we are already using today, water, you see that we will use in 2050 less water than the water which is already desalinized in 2018, and far less, around 100 times less than the water used in agriculture. So yes, there may be some local water stress, but hydrogen will not be the primary cause of this water stress, even if of course we have to take that into account depending where we will produce that hydrogen. Another point usually some people are mentioning is the global warming potential of hydrogen. And here also you see on this map created by the Joint Research Center earlier this year after a common international workshop on the topic. There are different sources of hydrogen or sinks of hydrogen, but what we need to keep in mind is that hydrogen emissions to the atmosphere may impact the lifetime of other greenhouse gases like methane, ozone, water vapor. And this means that hydrogen has no direct global warming potential, but has an indirect global warming potential and may increase the Earth's surface temperature. And so what can we do to avoid that? Is to shift as fast as possible to a fossil-free hydrogen economy. And this would significantly reduce the global warming impact. If you have no more or much less methane and other in the atmosphere, then for sure we will have far less temperature increase. Another way is also, of course, while we will increase the amount of hydrogen produced in order to minimize all the hydrogen leakages all along the value chain. And this is for the environment, but as hydrogen is quite expensive to produce, for sure it is also very good for the economy, and that's why we may trust to decrease as much as possible any hydrogen leakages in order to to make hydrogen much more expensive while losing some hydrogen directly in the atmosphere instead of selling it. So in conclusions, I would say that as we may have seen that more and more countries now have developed their own hydrogen strategy, more than 30 countries this year. And the demand of hydrogen, low carbon and renewable hydrogen has been significantly increasing over the last years. And of course, this will create some global hydrogen economy with some emerging trade routes. But in order to make this happen, there are some barriers to be overcome, like to enable demand visibility, to create off-takers, and this needs trust, regulatory certainty by adopting legally binding and transparent measures as common international standards. And that's all along the hydrogen value chain. Transparency is quite important in order to create trust. And here we can see that if we want to produce these international regulations and I would say coherent, coordinated regulations, international collaboration and coordination is really key. And we also, in particular as researchers, we need to contribute to these regulations, to these standards in order to ensure that all these texts are scientific based, in order really to create trust towards the producers, the investors, but finally also the whole society. So thank you very much for your attention.